A name could be an inheritance, a warning, or a cage, and Genevieve Nightshade had learned to wear all three meanings at once. Houses rose and fell on bloodlines, men swore loyalty to symbols stitched on banners, and women like her were told to survive by becoming small enough to pass unnoticed beneath those banners. Yet names refused to stay quiet. They moved through halls in whispers, through courts in accusations, through ledgers in ink that looked clean while it recorded ruin. By the time the mountain wind reached the border checkpoint that night, her name had already been priced, weighed, and offered like grain. The iron bit into the skin above her wrists each time the wagon jolted over stone. Xavier Blackwood had wrapped her in a merchant cloak to hide the chains, but the link still knocked softly against the wooden bench, a private rhythm of humiliation beneath wool and road dust. She kept her shoulders rounded and her head bowed because she had learned that men mistook stillness for obedience, and obedience sometimes bought one more hour of breathing. The checkpoint fires burned blue with pitch and juniper. Black Fang sentries watched from towers built directly into the ravine wall, their silhouettes cut from moonlight and spear points. Xavier climbed down first, smiling the way he did when he meant to ruin someone in public. "You will not speak," he said over his shoulder, not looking at her. "You are alive because I am merciful. Do not force me to reconsider." Merciful. The word almost made her laugh, but the laugh curdled before it reached her throat. 3 years of scrubbing stone floors before sunrise. 3 years of sleeping in a storage alcove beside sacks of salt because servants were not permitted room by the hearth. 3 years of hearing her mother called traitor until the lie wore grooves in the walls. The guard captain approached with 4 soldiers and a writing board. A scar crossed his nose to the corner of his mouth, pulling his expression into a permanent half-sneer. He glanced at the covered wagon, then at Xavier's caravan behind it. Pack mules, iron-bound chests, armed outriders, and the 2 lacquered ledgers Xavier guarded more closely than people. "State your petition," the captain said. "Safe passage through Black Fang ravines to the southern markets," Xavier replied, smooth as polished glass. "No raids, no seized goods, no delays. In return, I offer compensation of strategic value." He turned, gripped Genevieve by the arm, and yanked her forward hard enough that pain lit up her shoulder. Her hood slipped. Cold air struck her face. The captain studied her features, and something sharpened in his gaze. "Nightshade bone structure," he murmured. "You are trading blood." "I am trading a burden," Xavier said. "A useless girl who has cost me coin, labor, and reputation. You know the standing order from the Eastern war camps. Royal lines fetch favor." Genevieve's breath stalled. War camps. She had heard enough in kitchens to know what that meant. Rites held under full moon, prisoners strapped into carved circles, blood taken in measured bowls while officials called it necessary. The captain tapped the board with his stylus. "Proof of transfer." Xavier took her chin in a grip that forced her face upward. "Tell him your name." Silence bought beatings. Speech bought consequences she could not predict. She chose speech. "Genevieve Nightshade," she said, voice rough. A murmur passed through the nearest soldiers. Xavier released her as if contact dirtied him. "Record complete," the captain said. He gestured to a broad-shouldered soldier standing beside the tower steps. "Stoneheart, you are taking custody." The man who stepped forward looked like he had been built for battlefield weather and bad outcomes. Scar over one brow, dark hair tied at the nape, travel-stained cloak. No insignia above common rank. When he took the chain from Xavier, his hand did not tighten for dominance. He just measured the weight, as if calculating damage. Xavier dusted his gloves. "I expect acknowledgement of receipt." "You will get your stamp," the captain said. "You get your road at dawn." Xavier's attention moved over Genevieve without landing on her. A final inventory check. "Try to run again," he said quietly, And this man will drag you by the throat. I spared you once. Do not ask for a second kindness. The words struck harder than a blow because she knew he believed them. Forgiveness, in his vocabulary, meant delayed disposal. Stoneheart led her away from the checkpoint fire toward a lower trail where shadow swallowed sound. The chain between them stayed loose. Behind them, clerks shouted counts, mules brayed, and wax seals cracked over paperwork that converted a human life into permission to cross a map line. She walked because there was nowhere else to put her body. If I stay with Black Fang Command, I become a ritual tool. If I get sent back, I become property again. If I fight now, I die on this path, and Xavier keeps both his ledgers and his sleep. Think, count, breathe. Left foot, right foot. Watch his hands, the slope, the distance between torches. There is always one gap in a routine. There is always one person who looks away. I am not brave. I am not chosen. I am only not finished. The trail narrowed between slate outcrops and dead pines. A horse waited below, saddled for one rider with supply bundles tied behind. Stoneheart paused, studying the switchbacks vanishing into the dark. You can climb? He asked. She stared at him, suspicious of the question itself. Yes. He nodded once and handed her a water skin. Drink. We move fast. She hesitated, then drank. The water tasted faintly of smoke and mint, shockingly clean. He took the skin back, checked the sky, and swore under his breath. What camp? She asked. He glanced at her and his voice dropped low. Not the one they wrote on that board. Fear and hope collided so violently she almost missed his next movement. He drew a hooked blade, crouched by the nearest support post of the rope bridge spanning the ravine, and struck flint to tar-soaked cloth already wrapped around the timber. Fire climbed instantly, orange and hungry. Genevieve stepped back. What are you doing? Removing options. He moved to the second post, lit it, then the third marker stake lining the descent. Flames ran along pitch lines like bright veins opening under the skin of the mountain. Get on the horse! Shouts rose from above as sentries spotted the first bridge catching. Bell metal rang, high and frantic. Stoneheart tossed her the reins, then sprinted uphill to two stacked crates near the trail fork. He kicked them over, smashed a clay jar, and black tar flooded the switchback. One spark and the path became a wall of fire. This was the breaking point, sharp as flint in her chest. If she stayed frozen, patrols would pin her between burning bridges and Black Fang steel. If she obeyed him, she vanished into lands mapped by men who had already sold her once tonight. Neither choice looked like safety. One looked like movement. She mounted. He vaulted up behind her, took the chain at her wrists, and with a brutal jerk drove it against the saddle horn until one rivet snapped. Not freedom, not yet, but slack enough for her hands to reach front instead of back. Hold the mane, he said. Lean with the turns. Arrows hissed from the ridge, striking rock in bright sparks. He did not draw steel. He pressed two fingers to his throat and released a command that rolled out deeper than spoken sound, an alpha force tuned to authority. Horses in the upper yard screamed and reared. Men stumbled, cursing, suddenly unsteady on their feet. The pursuing line broke long enough for them to clear the first bend. Wind tore at her hood. Smoke stung her eyes until tears blurred the trail. The horse pounded downhill through a corridor of pine and ash, hooves slipping on shale, recovering, driving forward again. Behind them, one bridge gave way with a crack that echoed across the ravine like splitting ice. Embers spiraled upward, carried by a hard eastern gust. At the gorge floor, they cut through a shallow stream and up the opposite bank where old waystones stood toppled in the weeds. Stoneheart dismounted only once, long enough to kick down a painted supply marker and toss it into the current. Then he remounted and pushed them deeper into the dark. They rode until checkpoint bells faded into distance, and only the horse's breath and the whisper of burning timber remained. By the time the first gray edge of dawn touched the ridgeline, every route back to Xavier's stamped agreement was either ash, collapse, or deliberate confusion. Genevieve looked over her shoulder at smoke braided across the ravine and understood, with a clarity that frightened her, that the road had not merely been blocked, it had been erased. "You burned his passage," she said. Stoneheart's jaw tightened. "I burned your cage." For the first time in 3 years, the future in front of her was not a room someone else had locked. It was a wilderness with no promises, no witnesses, and no price tag already attached. Terror sat beside that realization. So did a thin, stubborn thread of relief she did not trust yet. She faced forward as the horse carried them into enemy lands that no longer had a road behind her. The horse descended through a stand of black pine so dense that dawn arrived in fragments, thin strips of silver laid across roots and stone. Genevieve kept one hand in the mane and the other curled around the broken slack of chain, every joint in her body aching from cold, fear, and the rigid balance of not falling. Behind her, Bastion guided the turns with minimal pressure, never crowding her more than the saddle required, but she could feel the contained force in him as clearly as the heat of his chest through 2 layers of wool. They crossed a narrow shelf where the cliff opened to a valley carved by old water. Mist pooled low over reeds and dark marsh pools, and beyond it rose a line of standing stones cut with weather-smoothed runes. Not Blackwood script, not border marks she knew. Territory markers, older than the checkpoint bureaucracy, older than ledgers. The sight made the back of her neck prickle. Bastion slowed the horse before the first stone. He did not speak at once. He looked from the carvings to the ridgeline, and then toward the paling eastern sky, as if calculating more than distance. "Listen to me," he said, voice roughened by smoke. "From here forward, keep your hood up unless I tell you otherwise. If anyone asks, you are under my protection by field authority." Field authority for what army? For mine. The answer was too precise and too evasive at once. She turned half toward him, searching his face, but he had already nudged the horse onward between the stones. The chain at her wrists knocked softly against the saddle horn, a reminder that protection and captivity could wear the same posture until tested. An hour later, the trail widened into a wind-cut basin where old watchtowers leaned like broken teeth against the hills. Fresh tracks crossed the mud. Horses, boots, one heavy wolf print in partial shift. Genevieve's pulse climbed. She smelled cook fire before she saw the outpost itself, hidden behind a ring of thorn palisade and slate walls built into the slope. Men moved along the parapet with bows unstrung but ready. They were dressed in mixed leathers, no unified crest, yet their spacing and alertness spoke of drilled discipline. A horn call sounded, low and two-toned. The gate did not open. "Dismount," Bastion said. She slid down with less grace than she wanted, knees threatening to buckle when her boots hit ground. Fatigue rolled through her in a hard wave, black at the edges. She straightened anyway, lifting her chin beneath the hood. If these were the men he had chosen over Black Fang Command, she needed to watch how they watched him. 3 figures came out from the gate tunnel. An older woman with a spear and iron-gray braid, a broad man with a scarred jaw, and a younger scout carrying no visible weapon at all. The woman stopped 5 paces away and looked first at Bastion's face, then at the broken chain on Genevieve's wrists. "You were due at War Camp East," the woman said. "Orders changed," Bastion replied. "By whom?" He held her gaze. "By me." Silence stretched. The younger scout's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. The broad man shifted his weight and bowed his head without meaning to, as if his body had recognized rank before his mind agreed to it. Genevieve felt it then. Not a sound, not a scent, but a pressure moving through the air like a storm front that never reached rain. Bastian was not posturing. He was holding something enormous in restraint, and everyone in that yard felt the effort. The woman struck the butt of her spear once against the packed earth. "Gate!" she called. The tunnel opened. No one challenged him again. Inside, the outpost smelled of boiled grain, leather oil, and banked coals. Men and women in travel armor moved around supply tables, speaking in clipped tones that died when Bastian passed. Not fear exactly. Deference wrapped in urgency. Genevieve caught fragments as they crossed the courtyard. Ravine burned by dawn. Blackwood stamp void now. If the council hears... Bastian led her to a side lean-to with a water barrel and a stone bench. He took a small key from his belt, crouched, and unlocked one shackle, then the other. The iron fell open with a dull clang that made her flinch anyway. He did not touch her skin. He only set the cuffs on the bench and stepped back. "You can wash," he said. "Eat if you can keep it down. We leave before second bell." She rubbed at the angry grooves around her wrists, staring at the red crescents where metal had lived too long. "Why are they looking at you like that?" A humorless curve touched his mouth. "Because I set their winter stores on fire once." She blinked. He added, dry enough to almost be a joke. "They forgave me when they realized it was the enemy's winter stores." Against her own will, a short breath of laughter escaped her, thin and startled. It vanished quickly, replaced by the old instinct to scan exits, count weapons, never let relief settle. Still, the sound had happened. Bastian looked away first, giving her privacy as if that too were part of his discipline. When she finished washing, a young attendant brought broth and hard bread, set them down, and nearly dropped the bowl when her gaze met Genevieve's face. Blackwood features recognized. The girl retreated without a word. Genevieve ate in measured swallows while Bastian stood at the edge of the lean-to, speaking quietly with the gray-braided woman. Their voices stayed low, but one phrase carried. "Ash Vainford, by moonrise." Moonrise. They were not stopping. Good, she told herself, though every muscle begged for sleep. Staying in one place meant questions, witnesses, a chance for bounty seekers. Movement was safer until it wasn't. By late afternoon, clouds had drawn over the basin in layered slate, and the wind shifted colder out of the north. They left through a rear cut in the wall with 2 fresh water skins, a packet of dried meat, and no escort. The outpost gate closed behind them with a heavy wooden thud that echoed in her sternum like a finality she did not understand. The trail to Ash Vein wound through iron-rich rock that stained the streambeds rust-red in daylight. As dusk gathered, that same water darkened to wine-black beneath the trees. Genevieve rode in silence, exhaustion pressing behind her eyes until the world narrowed to hoofbeats, breath, and Bastian's steady presence at her back. At the first sight of the ford, he reined in. Moonlight had broken through a seam in the cloud bank and spilled across the water in a pale band. Flat shale shelves stepped into the current like worn stairs. On the far bank stood another set of runestones, these carved deeper, the grooves filled with silver residue that caught light and held it. "We cross on foot," Bastian said. "Less noise." He dismounted and offered his hand, palm up, waiting. Not command, invitation. She took it because she needed the leverage, not because trust had suddenly become simple. He steadied her as she slid down, then released her immediately. The horse drank while they moved toward the waterline. Genevieve crouched to splash her face, and the first touch of ford water shocked cold through her skin. She braced her hand on a shale edge to stand. Stone sliced her palm. She hissed and jerked back. A bright bead of blood welled, then dropped, one red thread striking the moonlit current. The world changed direction. Scent rose from the water in a pulse she had no language for, silver and wild and impossibly familiar. as if winter air and hearth fire had been braided together and placed directly against her throat. Heat flooded up her spine so fast her knees weakened, her breath locked. A deep, low thrum built beneath her ribs, answering something older than memory. Bastian froze 2 steps away, head snapping toward her. He took a sharp breath that sounded torn out of him. Amber bled through his irises, predator and man colliding in one stunned expression. For one suspended heartbeat, he looked younger, raw with disbelief. Then he dropped to one knee in the water, fist over his heart. "Genevieve," he said, and her name in his voice was not identification. It was vow, reverence, ruin. She stared at him, unable to move. The bond hit her in successive waves, warmth settling low in her belly, a fierce pull across the small distance between them, and beneath both, terror, bright as a blade. Every person who had claimed her had shaped that claim into a weapon. Uncle, house, name. She had survived by cutting herself away from need before need could be used. Now her body betrayed strategy. Instinct sharpened along her spine until each sound at the ford came through crystalline and close. Water sliding over rock, horse shifting weight, Bastian's heartbeat, heavy and uneven. No, this cannot be happening. Not here, not with him, not after tonight. Bonds are chains with prettier language. Stay sharp, step back, breathe. But the scent keeps pulling, and the pull is not only desire, not only hunger. It is recognition so complete it feels like grief. I know you. I know the shape of your silence. I know the way danger bends around you. If I accept this, I can be broken through it. If I refuse it, something vital will tear anyway. There is no clean choice, only cost. She pressed her bleeding palm against her cloak, as if pressure could contain whatever had opened. Bastian remained kneeling. He did not reach for her. The amber in his gaze steadied but did not fade. "I will not touch you without your word," he said, voice low, each syllable deliberate against strain. "Not now, not ever. But you should know what happened." She laughed once, too breathless for humor. "I know enough." "Do you?" His question held no challenge, only aching caution. He rose slowly, water streaming from his gloves, and stopped at arm's length. Moonlight caught the side of his throat, and for an instant she saw faint runic lines beneath skin, as if gold had been banked there like coals under ash. "You are my mate," he said, "and I am trying very hard not to frighten you with what that means to me." The honesty hit harder than grand declarations could have. She met his gaze and could not look away. The pull between them tightened, not a rope around her throat, but a live thread humming from sternum to sternum. She hated how much she wanted to step closer. She hated that hate, because beneath it sat relief so profound it was almost painful. Across the ford, a night bird called once and fell silent. Clouds closed over the moon, then parted again, casting them in alternating shadow and silver. They stood in that shifting light, two people branded by the same sudden certainty, both still enough to hear the danger in it. Genevieve swallowed, tasted iron, and lifted her chin. "If this is real," she said, "you tell me everything at the next fire. No half-truths, no ranks hidden behind borrowed names." Bastian inclined his head, a warrior's assent and a promise bound together. Everything. She did not give him her hand. She did not retreat either. Locked in each other's gaze above the dark moving water, they stepped into the ford side by side, each aware that the crossing ahead was no longer only about territory. The current pulled hard around their boots, cold enough to numb her cut palm, sharp enough to keep every nerve awake. Genevieve placed each step where Bastian stepped, not from obedience but because the shale shelves were slick and the water hid sudden drops. He kept half a pace to her left, close enough to catch her if she slipped, far enough that she could pretend she was crossing alone. The thread between them hummed anyway, that new relentless awareness she could neither silence nor name without shaking. When they reached the far bank, she climbed first, breathing hard, cloak heavy with water at the hem. Bastian brought the horse across last, murmuring low at the animal until it found footing on the stones. He did not look at her until they were all clear of the current. When he did, his expression had the same careful discipline she had seen in men carrying lit powder through crowded rooms. North Ridge has an old watch chapel, he said. Roof still holds if the wind stays east. And if it doesn't? Then we learn whether prayers keep out rain. The line was dry enough to be intentional. It surprised a small sound out of her, not quite a laugh, more an exhale with edges. He seemed to take that as permission to move, and they started up the narrow path between juniper and broken stone. The climb stole speech. Wind rose around them, pushing cloud shadows over the slope in long, moving bars. At the ridge crest, the chapel appeared as a dark shape against a thinning moon, squat walls of old granite, one bell arch empty, door hanging crooked on a single hinge. Someone had carved protective runes over the lintel generations ago. Moss had eaten half the lines. Inside, the air smelled of dust, old wax, and cold ash. A cracked altar stood against the back wall beneath a faded moon emblem. The floor was littered with pine needles blown in through the broken shutter. Bastian set down his pack, checked corners in a swift practiced sweep, then turned to her. "You choose where you sleep," he said. "Door, wall, or loft. I'll take what's left." She stared at him. "You're giving me first choice." "Yes." That single syllable unsettled her more than a command might have. She chose the space nearest the side window, where she could see the door and the ridge trail, both. He nodded as if she had made a tactical decision he respected. Then he knelt by the hearth pit and rebuilt a fire from dry kindling pulled out of his oilskin wrap. Only after flames steadied did he lift a kettle from his pack. "Your hand?" he said, not moving closer. "And your wrists. The iron left splinters." "I can do it." "You can. It will hurt more." She almost told him pain was familiar enough to be manageable. Instead, she held his gaze and waited for the hook hidden in kindness. None appeared. The silence lengthened until she sat on the edge of the stone bench and extended her injured hand, palm up, as if testing a bridge plank over a ravine. He came to her slowly and stopped a breath short of contact. "May I?" The question struck somewhere deep and buried. She gave a short nod. He cleaned the cut first with hot water steeped in sharp-smelling leaves, then used a slender metal pick heated in the flame to draw out fragments of shale. Every time she tensed, he paused and let her breathe. He narrated what he was doing in low, practical words, never once using the gentle tone that people wore when they wanted gratitude as payment. "This one is shallow. This one will sting. Last piece." Her wrists were worse. Raw grooves circled each one, skin swollen around tiny black flecks of iron. He wrapped her forearm with cloth to steady it, and worked with infuriating patience, plucking each splinter and dropping it into a tin lid with soft metallic ticks that sounded like a clock, measuring out a life she had not chosen. When one lodged deep and her whole body jerked, his hand closed over her knuckles by instinct, then released instantly. "Sorry," he said. "I should have warned you." No one apologized to servants for pain. The thought arrived cold and bright. "I am waiting for the turn. I am waiting for the price. For the hand that heals to become the hand that owns. This is the arithmetic I trust. Take, owe, repay." But he keeps asking. He keeps stopping when I flinch. He looks at me like a person carrying a wound instead of a tool needing maintenance. If I lean into this, I could break open in places I cannot reassemble. If I stay closed, I survive alone. I know how to survive alone. I do not know what to do with care that does not demand kneeling. When he finished binding her wrists with clean strips of linen, the shaking began. It came without warning, deep and humiliating, rattling through her shoulders and jaw until she could not hold still. Cold was part of it. So was exhaustion. So was the bond, alive under her skin like a second pulse. Bastian stood, unclasped his fur-lined cloak, and held it out. "You'll warm faster with this. You'll freeze. I run hot." A beat passed, then he added, almost flat, "One of the few royal blessings nobody writes songs about." She blinked at the word royal, but he had already draped the cloak around her shoulders and stepped away before she could question him. True to his earlier promise, he took position on the floor by the door with his back to her, sword within reach, but sheathed, gaze fixed on the dark outside through the broken hinge gap. He did not watch her sleep. Wind tapped branches against stone. Fire sank to coals, her body uncoiled by reluctant degrees under the weight and scent of his cloak, smoke and cedar and wild winter air. At some point she slept with one hand fisted in the fur. By first light the clouds had cleared. Pale sun spilled through the side window in a narrow bar that reached her boots. Bastian was already up, saddling the horse outside. On the bench beside her sat a ration packet split exactly in half, one portion wrapped in cloth, the other open with a strip of dried venison laid over hard bread. When he stepped back in, she was watching him. "You left me the larger share," she said. "I'm larger. I heal faster. You need strength now." That answer makes no sense. It makes enough. He tightened the strap on his bracer, then glanced down at himself, soot-streaked and travel-worn, and his mouth tilted with that same restrained dryness. "For whatever comfort it offers, kings in songs always smell glorious. At present, I smell like smoke and horse sweat." The absurdity of it cracked her composure. She laughed, full this time, brief, but real. Something in his shoulders eased at the sound. He handed her water skin and waited while she ate. They left the chapel with the morning still thin and cold, taking a hunter's path that skirted the main road. By late afternoon, after miles of switchbacks and scrub valleys where crows tracked them from rock to rock, the trail widened toward a neutral outpost built around an old stone cistern. Tents ringed the yard beside timber sheds, and mixed banners hung limp on a central pole. No pack claim, only truce colors used by traders and hired blades. Genevieve felt the shift as soon as they entered. Eyes found her hood, stayed. A man in patched mail blocked their way to the water trough. "Travel tax," he said. 2 silvers per head." Bastian tossed one coin. 1 horse, 1 rider, 1 protected dependent. The man caught it, weighed it, and smiled without warmth. "Dependent has a face worth more than coin. Lift your hood, girl." Genevieve kept her chin level. "No." 3 more mercenaries drifted closer, casual in the way wolves were casual before a lunge. One of them circled to her right. Another pulled a folded parchment from his belt and snapped it open. Even from a distance she recognized Xavier's seal pressed in black wax. "Notice says Nightshade female," he called. "Wanted breathing, amnesty and coin." The yard quieted. People turned but did not intervene. Bastian moved between her and the parchment in a single step, still not drawing steel. "Stand down," he said. The nearest mercenary laughed. "Your common rank carrying a branded prize. Move, or we take her and let counsel sort your complaint." A primary fear in Genevieve had always been that power revealed itself as cruelty. She watched Bastian's profile, waiting for violence to answer threat. Instead, he inhaled once, slow, and let his voice drop into command. "Kneel." The word hit the yard like a pressure wave. 3 armed men crashed to their knees at once, palms slamming dirt, faces twisted in shocked fury as their bodies obeyed what their pride could not. Tankards rattled on a nearby table. The horse flattened its ears and stamped. The captain by the cistern straightened, eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" he said carefully, to carry that authority in a soldier's coat. No one moved. Bastian's expression remained carved from restraint. Someone telling you to end this while you still can. The captain flicked 2 fingers. A mercenary behind Genevieve lunged, hand reaching for her arm, fast and dirty. Bastian pivoted, taking the shoulder strike meant for her with a grunt that she felt in her own bones through the bond. He caught the attacker's wrist, turned, and sent him sprawling without breaking anything. Then his sleeve rode back. Runes flared along his wrist and throat, molten gold under skin, not fully unleashed, but unmistakable. The air in the yard tightened. Even the captain took one involuntary step back. Genevieve stared. The pieces she had been refusing slid toward one another with brutal clarity. The checkpoint deference, the outpost gate opening at one word, the command that bent men to earth, the banked power he kept leashed like a beast taught discipline by scars. Treason wears many faces, the captain said, voice thin now. Truth does too, Bastian replied. You were offered coin for a woman. I am offering you your teeth and your freedom to walk away. For a breath, she thought they would force a fight anyway. Then the captain lowered his hand. Take water and go, he said. Your quarrel is above my pay. Bastian did not thank him. He stepped back to Genevieve's side, creating space for her to choose. He did not seize her elbow or steer her like property. She walked to the trough on her own, filled both skins, and returned while the kneeling men struggled to stand without meeting her eyes. At the gate, she paused and looked up at him. A bruise was already darkening along his collar where the blow had landed. He saw her glance and shrugged as if pain were administrative. You protected me, she said quietly. Yes. Without forcing me. His gaze softened, wolf and man aligned in one fierce calm. Protection is not possession. The sentence settled into her like heat near frozen hands. She studied him for another moment, then did the smallest, hardest thing she had done since the ford. She reached out, took his wrist where the runes had faded back beneath skin, and let her fingers rest there in plain view of anyone watching. Then keep teaching me the difference, she said. His breath caught once, barely audible. He covered her hand with his, careful, reverent, and together they stepped beyond the outpost gate with her guard lowered by one deliberate degree. The road beyond the outpost gate dropped into a narrow defile where dusk gathered early, and Genevieve kept her hand on Bastian's wrist for 3 more steps before she let go, as if her fingers needed time to relearn the difference between choosing contact and being held. They walked in silence until the truce banners vanished behind stone. Wind carried peat smoke from some unseen settlement lower in the valley, and with it came the distant clap of hooves. Bastian lifted one hand, signaling stillness, then guided her off the path behind a screen of thorn and juniper. A rider came hard along the road with a leather satchel bouncing against his hip and parchment tubes strapped across his back. No escort. Too fast for ordinary trade. The rider slowed at the first waystone, dismounted, and hammered a notice into the wood post with 3 quick strikes. He mounted again without reading what he had nailed there. The behavior of a man paid to spread fear, not information. Bastian's jaw tightened. Stay here. He moved out from cover and stepped into the road. The courier yanked reins, startled, then reached for the knife at his boot. Bastian did not draw his blade. He spoke once, low and sharp, and authority folded through the air like a drawn bow. The courier's hand fell away from the knife as if his muscles had forgotten the motion. Off the horse, Bastian said. The man obeyed, shaking. Genevieve came out from the thorns and approached the post. Black wax seal. Xavier's crest pressed over council script. Her throat closed around old dread as she tore the notice loose and read, by failing light. By decree of emergency authority, Genevieve Nightshade stood accused of blood theft, matricide, and ritual corruption. Any pack delivering her breathing before the next full moon would receive amnesty for prior border violations and a bounty paid from confiscated Nightshade assets. She was to be remanded for purification hearing at the Old Palace. Purification, a polished word for slaughter. "There are 20 more in my satchel," the courier blurted, eyes fixed on the ground. "Orders from Regent Office. Every market gate from here to the Eastern Ridge." "Who signed?" Bastian asked. The courier swallowed. "Xavier Blackwood, countersigned by 2 council elders." Genevieve read the line again and felt the old training rise in her, that disciplined numbness that had carried her through kitchens, chains, and checkpoint fire. It did not fully come this time. Anger arrived first. "My mother's death was called law," she said quietly. "Now he calls me her murderer." Bastian held out his hand. She passed him the notice. His gaze tracked each line, then settled on the final paragraph, where execution language hid beneath ceremonial phrasing. For one beat, she saw the predator surface through his restraint. The courier risked a glance at Genevieve's face and blanched. "Blackwood said the girl would travel with a false king. Said the real Alpha King vanished years ago and any man claiming his command is a traitor." There it was, placed like a blade between ribs. Genevieve turned toward Bastian, the question she had been carrying since the ford now stripped of delay. "Everything," she said. "Now." He took the satchel from the courier, cut its strap, and dropped it at her feet. Scrolls spilled across gravel, each stamped with the same lie. Then he faced her fully. "My birth name is Bastian Ironheart," he said. "Stoneheart was the name I wore in the ranks. I disappeared by design after my predecessor died because the council had already begun selling law to the highest bidder. I needed their network exposed before I could break it. Xavier was one of the men feeding it." The courier made a choking sound. Bastian did not look at him. "I am the Alpha King by blood and claim," he continued, voice level despite the fury beneath it. "If I had returned openly before I had proof, civil war would have started in a week. Xavier is forcing it anyway. He wants the moon vault beneath the old palace. Only Nightshade blood opens the inner seal. He cannot touch it without you." Genevieve stared at him, pulse loud in her ears. The shape of Xavier's fear from all those years finally made cruel sense. She had never been a burden. She had been a key he preferred locked until he could use her. Bastian stepped closer, still leaving space between them. "He does not need you dead yet. He needs you breathing at the threshold. After that, he can call anything justice." By the second night after the ford, every village post they passed carried the same notice. They burned what they could reach, but rumor outran fire. At a shepherd camp on the high slope, an old woman refused their coin for milk and instead crossed herself with moon ash when she saw Genevieve's face. At a mill bridge before dawn, 2 pack sentries let them pass, then rang warning bells anyway. At noon, a trader cart rolled by with children hidden under wool against the cold, and the driver spat in the road behind them after reading the proclamation aloud for his passengers. Pressure changed the landscape faster than weather. Inns closed shutters when they approached. Neutral wells suddenly had guards. Men who would have sold information for silver yesterday now waited against amnesty and pardon crimes. Near sunset, they took shelter in a collapsed charcoal burner's hut above a ravine lined with alder and ice-fed streams. Bastian barred the door with a beam and lit no fire. Moonlight came through the broken roof in narrow bars, painting his hands in alternating pale and shadow as he sorted the stolen scrolls. Genevieve sat across from him with her back to the wall, cloak wrapped tight, watching his profile and trying to reconcile soldier, king, and mate without losing herself to any one version. When he finished reading, he passed her one last document. This one was not public notice. It was correspondence between Xavier and the Eastern Tribunal clerk, written in cipher shorthand Bastian translated under his breath. Transfer of subject. Moon vault access scheduled before full moon peak. Public hearing after extraction. Disposal authorized upon completion. The words were dry. Their meaning was not. Genevieve folded the page until the parchment creased white. He planned this long before the checkpoint. Yes. And you took me from him before he was ready. He met her gaze. I took you because you are not a thing to transfer. Something softened and sharpened in her at once. Attraction had been there since the ford, bright and unnerving, but this was different. Trust trying to grow in ground salted by betrayal. She feared it precisely because it felt real. I want to step across this distance and put my hands on him until my pulse settles. I want to ask him to hold me and then never forgive myself for needing it. Need has always been a lever others pull. Need has always ended in debt. But the bond keeps reaching for him as if my body already knows a future my mind refuses to sign. If I give him that power, he could ruin me. If I deny what is here, Xavier still hunts me, and I walk into that hunt cut off from the one ally strong enough to stand beside me. This is the crux. I do not fear desire. I fear dependence disguised as salvation. Bastian spoke into the silence, careful, as if he could hear the shape of that fear without hearing the words. The bond does not erase choice. If you never mark me, I still fight for you. If you walk away when this ends, I do not follow without your consent. Her laugh was quiet and unsteady. You negotiate like a man asking terms from a queen. I speak like a man who has seen what crowns do when no one limits them. Outside, an owl called once from the ravine. Wind shifted through the roof gap and brought the scent of snow from distant peaks, though the valley below still held autumn. Bastian took a small brass whistle from his pocket and blew 2 notes, then 3, too high for human ears. A few breaths later, an answering cry came from the dark, wolf-long and disciplined. Who heard that? She asked. Captain Morell at the Ridge Watch, if she still holds loyalty. He paused. By morning we will know. Morning delivered the answer in a runner with torn sleeves and mud to his knees. Morell had sent no men. Half her garrison had defected after the proclamation. The remaining half could not leave their post without exposing refugees on the western road. She sent one warning instead. Council wardens were marching under legal seal with Blackwood hunters attached, and they carried a writ granting seizure rights across neutral lines. A law hunt. Clean ink over dirty intent. They moved before full daylight, cutting east toward the Basalt Narrows to avoid open settlements. By late afternoon, clouds thickened, and the first thin sleet began to fall, hissing against stone. Genevieve rode while Bastian led the horse on foot through a passage where cliff walls rose so close she could touch both sides if she stretched. The route was a choke point, necessary and dangerous. At the narrow's midpoint, a horn sounded ahead. Another answered behind. Bastian stopped. Down, he said. She slid from the saddle. Figures emerged on both ends of the pass, 20 at least, maybe more in the sleep blur. Some wore council gray with formal armbands. Others wore Blackwood green. A false neutrality made honest by neither side. At their center stood a lean man in tribunal black, holding a scroll case lacquered against wet. He lifted his voice so it carried between stone walls. By order of emergency regency, surrender the accused Genevieve Nightshade for remand and submit yourself, claimant Ironheart, for examination under treason charter. Bastian's expression did not change. You bring hunters under legal cloth. That voids your charter. The tribunal man smiled thinly. Law is what can be enforced. He cracked the case and unrolled the writ, speaking names of elders and seals as if ritual could cleanse corruption. At the final line, Blackwood hunters advanced with silver thread nets weighted for wolves and humans alike. Archers along the ledges drew in unison. Genevieve stepped to Bastian's shoulder. If we run, they pin us in the open. If we stand, they take you breathing. His voice stayed low. I can break the front line. I cannot guarantee no one dies in the crush. The old fear rose, then met something newer and steadier inside her. Not courage exactly, but refusal. Xavier had counted on her being moved like cargo between stronger hands. Even here, in sleet and stone and legal theater, she could still choose how this began. She lifted her voice toward the tribunal man. Read the charge against me again. Loud enough for your own wardens. He frowned, thrown by the demand. Blood theft, matricide, ritual corruption. Genevieve pointed at the writ. And where is witness attestation for my mother's death? Where is chain of custody for evidence? Where is council quorum stamp? Murmurs moved through the nearest gray armband wardens. The tribunal man's jaw flexed. Technicalities do not shield traitors. Neither does forged process shield cowards, she said. A hunter on the left ledge loosed too soon. The arrow struck the rock at Genevieve's feet and shattered. In that same instant, Bastian released his restraint. Power slammed down the pass like thunder trapped in a corridor. Two archers dropped their bows, gasping. Nets flew anyway. One wrapped Bastian across chest and arms, silver threads flaring as they tightened. He tore through the first layer, but a second and third hit from opposite sides, anchoring to iron spikes already hammered into the cliff, prepared, planned for him. Genevieve, move! He shouted. Wardens surged through the opening, shields up, hunters behind them with shackles ready. She grabbed a fallen spear shaft and spun, striking one shackle hand aside, then another, buying heartbeats, while Bastian fought the net lattice that burned gold against his runes. The tribunal man raised a small obsidian sealstone and slammed it against the writ. Black smoke burst outward in a ring, not fire, not poison, but binding ash that clung to skin and dulled wolf scents. Genevieve coughed, vision narrowing. Through the haze she saw Bastian drop to one knee under the net's weight, still trying to rise, teeth bared in a silent snarl of effort. The pass filled with shouts, sleet, and the metallic rattle of chains. Then she heard a voice she would have known in any storm. Careful with her! Xavier Blackwood called from behind the tribunal line as he rode into view beneath a black hooded cloak, calm as a man arriving to audit accounts. She opens doors. I need her hands unbroken. Genevieve's stomach turned cold, then hard. The hunters surged again, disciplined now that they had their master in sight. Two wardens pinned her spear arm, another slammed her against the cliff, and iron bit her wrists before she could twist free. Across the pass, Bastian roared and tore one silver thread net clean through, but the obsidian ash on his skin dulled the force of his shift. More weighted lines dropped from the ledges and dragged him down to one knee. Xavier dismounted with careful elegance, boots untouched by mud despite the sleet. He stopped in front of her and studied her face the way he once studied ledgers, searching for leverage rather than kinship. You were always dramatic under pressure, he said. Still, this is useful. Witnesses, lawful seizure, a false king in restraints. I could not have staged it better. She held his gaze. You forged charges. I refined narrative. His mouth curved. The realm prefers clean villains. A grieving niece who killed her mother in blood madness is far easier to govern than a council that sold its courts. Bastian strained against the net anchors, runes blazing at his throat. Touch her, and lose that hand. Xavier glanced toward him with thin amusement. Your Majesty without a throne. I warned them your voice would feel convincing. Then he reached for Genevieve's bandaged palm. She jerked back, but a hunter trapped her elbow. Xavier produced a narrow glass vial and a ritual lancet from his sleeve, bright as ice in the sleet. Hold still, he said softly. I only need enough to wake the first seal. Rage surged hot through her fear. She drove her forehead into his nose, sharp and fast. Xavier stumbled with a curse, blood spotting the front of his cloak. The wardens flinched, some from shock, some from sudden satisfaction they tried to hide. One hunter struck her shoulder with the haft of his spear, and pain rippled down her arm, but she stayed upright. Xavier pressed a cloth to his nose, eyes flat now. Bind her mouth. No, said the tribunal man too quickly. The writ specifies no disfigurement and no airway compromise before hearing. For the first time that night, authority fractured in public. Genevieve saw it and moved her voice straight into the crack. You heard him, she called to the gray armband wardens. He has no lawful hearing, no quorum stamp, no witness attestation. He is transporting me to a private right. Murmurs ran down the line. Xavier's expression sharpened. Enough, he said. Move. They forced the column east through the narrows, hunters bracketing her, wardens surrounding Bastion in a ring of silver lines and pole hooks. He walked because they had rigged the nets to weighted poles carried by 6 men. Every burst of strength only dragged the hooks deeper into the lattice. He kept his eyes on Genevieve the entire descent, silent command and apology braided together in one look. By full dark, sleet had turned to freezing rain, and the old palace rose out of the ridge mist like a broken jaw of black stone. Torches burned along the lower court. More soldiers waited there, plus spectators drawn by proclamation and panic, faces pale in moonlight. On a raised platform above the courtyard stood 3 pack banners planted side by side, not in alliance, but in wary observation. Xavier had summoned witnesses after all, not for justice, but for legitimacy. At the base of the stairs, she saw them. Iron cages lined against the wall, each holding 2 or 3 household servants in torn livery, wrists tied, eyes wide, living collateral for ritual power. Her lungs seized. Xavier followed her gaze and smiled without warmth. Insurance. If the vault resists, sacrifice persuades. The words stripped the last hesitation from her. At the moon vault gates, carved silver sigils coiled across twin basalt doors veined with old lunar metal. Xavier dragged her to the threshold and lifted the lancet again. Open it, he said. Genevieve looked at the cages, then at Bastion kneeling under the net ring, then at the wardens whose faces had gone gray at what they now understood. She felt the bond thrumming between her and Bastion, fierce and steady despite distance, and made her choice. She wrenched her hand sideways, seized the spearhead at a guard's belt, and cut her own palm in one hard line. Blood welled hot. Before Xavier could catch her wrist, she slammed that blood onto the threshold sigil and spoke in a voice that carried across stone. I am Genevieve Nightshade, blood heir by matriarch Elsinore, and I invoke first oath before witness. The sigils ignited silver gold. A shockwave rippled through the courtyard, knocking torches sideways and driving every wolf in partial shift back a step. Xavier lunged for her, but the lit threshold flared and threw him off balance. She kept speaking, each ancient phrase rising from memory her mother had hidden in bedtime hymns and kitchen lullabies. Vault of the realm, here lawful blood, open for judgment, not plunder, open for protection, not tyranny. The gates shuddered and began to part. Xavier screamed for archers. Bastion's voice cut through the chaos like iron striking stone. Hold! It was not aimed at enemies alone. It hit everyone with a rank-aware force that froze half the courtyard mid-motion. Genevieve took command in the same breath. Archers, hold fire until civilians clear, she shouted, pointing to the cages. Wardens, cut those bindings now if you still serve law. The gray armbands looked at one another, then moved. 2 dropped their pikes and ran to the prisoners. A hunter swung at them. Bastion tore free one arm from the net, seized the attacker by the chest harness, and hurled him into the ritual dais supports. Timber cracked. The platform listing above Xavier's clerks collapsed in a shower of boards and inkstones. Genevieve stepped through the opening gates into the first vault chamber, where moonlight poured from a broken dome onto a floor inlaid with concentric binding circles. Xavier staggered after her with 6 loyal guards, clutching the stolen vial he had taken from her blood at the pass. He uncorked it and flung the contents at the inner seal. The chamber answered with violent rejection. Black fire raced up the runes etched into his forearms, burning them dark. Xavier doubled over. A strangled cry ripped from his throat as his partial shift spasmed wrong, claws half-formed, then collapsing back into human hands. "You little fool!" he rasped. "I carried this realm while your line hid in prayer." He launched at her anyway, shoulder first, feral with pain and fury. Genevieve pivoted inside the innermost ring, palms open, and shouted the final clause her mother had made her repeat 100 quiet nights. "By blood remembered, by oath unbroken, traitor stands bound to the circle he profaned." Light slammed up from the floor, a band of silver locked around Xavier's ankles, then his waist, then his throat. He hit the stone hard, snarling, and tried to crawl across the line, but each inch tightened the binding until breath came in ragged bursts. Outside the ring, Bastion engaged the remaining guards exactly to its edge, and no farther, blade low, movements brutally efficient. He disarmed one, shoulder-checked another into a pillar, and blocked a spear thrust aimed for Genevieve without crossing into her judgment space. Xavier spat at her feet. "I made you useful." She stepped closer, blood still dripping from her palm into the sigil groove. "You made me fearless." The circle brightened. In the doorway, witnesses crowded the threshold. Wardens, rival pack envoys, freed servants clutching torn ropes. No one could claim this happened in secret. Xavier's face twisted with something beyond hatred, the panic of a man watching ownership fail. "You are nothing without my name." Genevieve stripped the blackwood crest from his cloak clasp and held it up for all to see. "I was born before your betrayal." Then she turned to the witnesses and spoke the sentence in the old legal form, voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs. "Xavier Blackwood, convicted of treason, unlawful seizure, forged tribunal process, and blood-right coercion under Moon Law, is stripped of rank and holding, branded moon-marked, and exiled beyond all allied pack borders. If he returns without summons, any sworn guard may enforce permanent ban." Xavier thrashed against the binding with a broken sound. "You cannot exile what you cannot control." "I do not need to control you," she said. "I need to end you as law." She pressed her bleeding palm to the final sigil. The circle contracted in a clean ring of force. Xavier's body arched once, then went slack, unconscious before his head struck stone. The blackened runes on his arms dimmed to ash-gray scars. For 3 long breaths, no one moved. Then Captain Morell stepped through the doorway, late but present, rain on her cloak and 30 ridge wolves at her back. She looked from the collapsed dais outside to the bound traitor inside and dropped to one knee. "Verdict witnessed," she said. One by one, others followed. Not worship, recognition. Bastion finally crossed into the chamber when the circle cooled, coming to Genevieve's side with blood on his sleeve and rain in his hair, eyes fixed on her cut hand first, then her face, checking damage before triumph. She swayed once as adrenaline drained. He caught her forearm, careful of the wound. "It's done," he said, voice rough with relief he did not hide. She looked at Xavier lying powerless in the ring, at the servants being led from cages into blankets and light, at wardens collecting every forged writ and sealing each as evidence before witnesses. Every thread that had hunted her now sat named, recorded, and broken in public view. "No," she said, breathing hard but standing straight. "It's begun." Bastion's grip on her forearm steadied rather than steered. Around them, the chamber moved from battle frenzy into deliberate procedure. Captain Morel barked orders at her ridge wolves to secure every entrance, then turned to the tribunal clerk who had traveled with Xavier and put a blade tip under his chin until he produced the seal ledger from his coat. In the courtyard, gray armband wardens stacked confiscated writs on a dry table and read each charge aloud before two witnesses, striking forged notices with red wax to mark them void. The courier satchel, the lacquered scroll case, and the obsidian seal stone were all tagged and locked in an iron coffer. Genevieve watched with a strange, aching clarity as evidence became record instead of rumor. Xavier's stolen blood vial lay shattered near the inner seal, glass fused by backlash. A young warden gathered every fragment with tongs and placed them into a cloth packet stamped for archive. Bastien noticed her staring and said quietly, "Nothing from your body will be used against you again." 2 hours later, the rain had passed, and moonlight washed the healing court in pale silver. Old yew trees ringed the open stone space, their trunks wrapped with prayer ribbons left by generations who had come there wounded and uncertain. Braziers burned low with cedar and winter sage. Healers had cleaned the cut on her palm, rewrapped her wrists, and left them alone at her request. Bastien stood at the center circle, cloak gone, throat bared, the runes along his neck a dim gold beneath skin. He had already given orders for Xavier's sentencing brand and escorted exile at dawn. He had already signed the evidence roll under his true name, Bastien Ironheart, Alpha King. But now he looked nothing like a ruler issuing commands. He looked like a man offering his life with both hands open. "If you want this," he said, voice rough and steady, "I kneel by choice. If you do not, I rise and stand beside you unmarked." He lowered himself to one knee. Genevieve's pulse hammered in her ears. The bond between them was no longer a distant thread. It was a bright current, warm and insistent, carrying fear, longing, and a fierce relief she had stopped believing she could feel. She stepped closer until she could smell cedar smoke, steel, and his skin beneath both. "I choose," she said. His eyes closed for one heartbeat, gratitude and ache crossing his face unguarded. When he opened them again, he tilted his head, exposing the line of his throat where pulse beat strong beneath the surface. Her hands shook as she cupped the back of his neck. "No chains," she whispered. "Only choice," he answered. She bent and bit over his pulse. Pain came first, sharp and immediate, then transformed as the bond surged open with luminous force. Heat flooded her mouth, then her chest, then every limb, not burning but awakening, as if locked rooms inside her had all been thrown wide to moonlight. Through him she tasted winter wind over high ridges, long marches, old grief held in silence, and a devotion so absolute it made her knees weaken. He exhaled her name like prayer and reached up, not to control, only to anchor. His fingers braced lightly at her waist until she released. When she drew back, a thin line of blood marked his skin before sealing into a glowing crescent. The runes at his throat flared once, then steadied. He rose slowly, towering now, yet careful with every movement as if she were both fragile and formidable in the same breath. He lifted his hand to her jaw, thumb trembling where it touched her cheek. "Mine," he said, not as possession, but as vow offered. She held his gaze. "Yours, mate," he whispered. The word settled through her like a bell tone. He waited for the smallest nod before he moved. When she gave it, he leaned to the junction of her neck and shoulder, right where old scar tissue met newer skin from shackles and flight. His bite was precise, a fierce sting that turned almost instantly into a deep, spreading warmth. The court vanished. The world narrowed to breath, heartbeat, and the brilliant opening of the bond completing in both directions. Memory fragments flashed between them in clear, unbidden sequence. Her mother's hands teaching an oath over a kitchen table, Bastian as a younger warrior swearing to guard a throne he distrusted. The chapel fire and his back turned so she could sleep unwatched, her laughter at smoke and horse sweat, his voice in the narrows shouting for her to move, her own at the vault, refusing retreat. Not stolen memories, shared ones, offered and received. She felt him sense the years she had lived reduced to utility, and then felt his response, wordless and iron strong, never again. He released gently and pressed his forehead to hers, gold light braided outward from both marks, visible now in the moonlit air as intertwined threads that pulsed once, twice, then sank beneath skin. The constant ache of uncertainty inside her quieted, not erased, settled. She touched the fresh mark at her shoulder and then his throat, wonder and disbelief mingling with hard-earned trust. Mine, she said this time, voice unsteady with joy she refused to hide. His smile broke through at last, worn and radiant. Yours, he answered. They held each other in the center of the healing court while the braziers hissed and the yew ribbons stirred. No audience, no decree, no bargaining table. Just two marked wolves breathing in rhythm until the bond's new equilibrium became home. By dawn, the courtyard of the old palace had been scrubbed of ash and reset for assembly. Representatives of the three rival packs stood beneath their banners, with wardens, merchants, and freed servants filling the lower tiers. Xavier, branded with the moon mark at his collarbone and bound in exile irons, was brought forward under Captain Morel's escort. He woke long enough to see the tribunal record read in full and the witness rolls signed. When the sentence was repeated, he said nothing. He was marched through the west gate and onto the border road under 12 guards, with orders sealed to every checkpoint that his return would trigger immediate detention. No one cheered. Law did not need spectacle. Genevieve stepped onto the dais wearing a plain, dark cloak clasped with the nightshade crest she had reclaimed, now recast without Blackwood colors. Bastian stood beside her, not above, his marked throat visible to every rank in the yard. She raised the decree tablet and spoke so even the back rows heard each word. Debt servitude is abolished in all territories under this accord. No person may be traded for passage, pardon, or political claim. Sanctuary routes are established through the ravines and eastern roads, guarded by mixed pack wardens under shared law. Violations will be tried in open witness court. A merchant elder started to protest loss projections. Genevieve met his stare until he looked away. You may submit compensation petitions, she said. You may not submit people. Captain Morel stepped forward first and knelt, fist to heart. Ridgewatch binds to the accord. The gray-braided commander from the Basin outpost came next, revealing she had held Bastion's identity in confidence for 3 years at cost, to her own standing. She knelt to Genevieve as Luna Queen and to Bastion as Alpha King, then rose to accept appointment as corridor marshal over the rebuilt border roads. One by one, the remaining pack envoys followed. When the pledges were done, Bastion took his oath aloud. I claim no sole rule. I hold crown and law beside my mate, with power constrained by witness and accord. Genevieve turned to him, sunlight catching the mark at her shoulder above her collar. No crown without us, she said softly, and he answered by threading his fingers through hers before the entire court. By midday, former household servants from Blackwood Estates arrived at the palace registry and signed their names as sworn officers with wages, quarters, and legal standing. The broken restraint fragments recovered from the outpost evidence cache were melted in the forge and recast into waymarkers for the first sanctuary road, each marker etched with one line from the new law: passage is not purchase. That evening, when the court emptied and the last signatures dried, Genevieve stood with Bastion on the rebuilt western parapet watching the first protected caravan cross the ravine under mixed pack guard. No hidden ledgers, no shackled cargo, no bargain made over a woman's body. She leaned into him, his arm warm around her shoulders, both marks humming with quiet certainty. "Home," he said. She looked at the road ahead, then at the man beside her, and let herself believe it. "Home," she agreed.